When I was a kid, video games were constantly evolving and changing rapidly. I found myself positively giggling with delight whenever I saw something shiny and new to play at the gaming kiosk. One game I distinctly remember playing for the first time was Donkey Kong Country at KB Toys, a staple of the 90s mall. As was a common occurrence during that time, my tiny kid brain was completely blown. Mind you, this was even before the release of CGI films like Toy Story. I'd never even seen rendering remotely like this before. Not only, of course, were the graphics engaging, but the platforming action was a lot of fun. I had a bit of a problem though. You see, kids have a lot of time to play video games, but no money to buy them. So I had to resort to my usual nagging and pleading with the almighty keepers of the purse. At that time, I also had a pretty prominent mole on my forehead, and my mom told me that if you can be brave during the operation to get it removed, my reward would be a shiny new copy of the game. I was duly motivated to be still, and I have some really great memories of playing through that classic. Now fast forward about a year later, and I was in the Cub Scout program with the old blue uniforms and all. I admit I was really bored with these meetings, but there was one big silver lining in that the Cub Master's home had a Super Nintendo, and that Super Nintendo had Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest. Fact of the matter is, the reason I'm telling these stories is that I have a very long history with these games. And in the case of Donkey Kong Country 2, the game hasn't aged a single day. As a matter of fact, even with all the advances that have happened since, like 3D graphics, and some other 2D greats like Yoshi's Island, Rayman, and the more recent Donkey Kong Country games, I think the game has endured through the decades as the absolute pinnacle of the 2D platformer genre. There is one word I would use to describe every single aspect of the game, from its design, graphics, music, and everything else, and that word is perfect. Let's start at the very beginning, shall we? From the very moment you switch the game on, you know greatness is going to happen. In the first of many brilliant tracks, David Wise's music absolutely explodes off the screen and fills you with euphoric anticipation. In that brief 12 seconds, you're already completely hooked, and it is an absolutely fantastic way to start the game. Diddy's Kong Quest feels both thematically and in terms of quality the Empire Strikes Back of the series. After Donkey Kong is kidnapped by Captain K. Rool, Diddy Kong and series newcomer Dixie must head to the Kremlin's home world of Crocodile Isle. Whereas the first game feels like a pleasant romp through Donkey Kong Land, this game makes one thing clear from the outset. You are in enemy territory. I mean, just look at how ominous it all appears. Gone are the happy, pleasant vibes of Donkey Kong Island, replaced by complete gloom and doom. One small little detail is just how much faster the characters move on the map screen compared to the first game. It adds to the sense of urgency as you adventure across a dangerous world. But what an amazing, beautiful world it is. While the first Donkey Kong Country was a pretty game, it did still overall have the look of being rendered when looking at it in retrospect. This game looks like it was painted, as Donkey Kong Country 2 has some of the most beautiful backgrounds ever created for a video game. Some of the backgrounds even vertically shift in perspective using the SNES 3D Mode 7, like you can see here in this flooded water level. Also, the environmental effects are brilliant, like the billowing clouds of the main Brace levels, or the glowing rays of sunlight in Gloomy Gulch. The mood that these levels convey is, in and of itself, perfectly crafted art that still looks amazing to this day. Character design and animation in this is also peak, with none other than rare legend Steve Mayles at the helm. Diddy and Dixie Kong move with such life, and the little personality touches like Diddy Kong's boombox or Dixie's guitar jam really bring a lot of life to the game. Moving on to gameplay though, DKC2 is filled to the brim with mechanics and gimmicks, with running, jumping, climbing, barrel blasting, swimming, and that's barely scratching the surface. Sometimes, a single level will change its gimmick about halfway through, like early on when you start the level with a springy snake, and then climb around dangerous ropes for the second half. In another, you start by navigating tricky barrels. and then later fly around and shoot eggs with a parrot. The game is constantly keeping you on your toes, and although several different level themes are used, it never ever feels repetitive. I also really like how Diddy and Dixie Kong control in the game, and how they each have a unique complementary feel depending on the situation. Diddy Kong is faster and more nimble with jumping and rolling, while Dixie Kong is a little slower but has the all-important helicopter ability. Then of course you have the throwing mechanic, which helps you reach high places and motivates you to keep both Kongs alive to find all the secrets. But of course, the Kongs aren't the only playable characters, as animal buddies return in this game and are absolutely phenomenal. Whereas the animal buddies in the first game were an optional but fun upgrade to make the level easier, the level design in the second one is more tailor-made to their abilities. Even putting in sections where you transform into the animals themselves, and going through obstacles only they could get through. Squidder the Spider is easily the best of the bunch, both with his iconic 8-sneaker look and his web abilities to create his own platforms. The level Web Woods is a long, beautiful gauntlet focused on this gimmick, and an extremely challenging one at that. The boss fights are also varied and absolutely spectacular. While they almost all involve simply picking something up and throwing it at them, it's how you get to that point that is always entertaining. The end fight with Captain K. Rool in particular feels a bit like a platformer bullet heck, with some shots having deadly status effects, like reversing your controls. And speaking of challenge, Donkey Kong Country 2 is arguably the most difficult game in the series, with some especially brutal levels in the last third of the adventure. I'll admit, over 2 decades of playing the game have kind of deadened me to it, but I can't forget the hours and hours I spent trying to clear levels like the aforementioned Web Woods, Castle Crush, Chain Link Chambers, and the absolute nightmare that is Animal Antics. In one section, you have to carefully fly through a narrow weaving bramble bush loaded with zingers, all while dealing with devilish alternating winds. I don't know how I got through it as a kid, but I was slightly surprised that nothing happened after completing it. At least, not right then. Which leads me to what I think is Donkey Kong Country's greatest achievement, and that is in earning its true ending. After defeating Captain K. Rool and rescuing Donkey Kong, Cranky Kong says, "I reckon I've found all the Krem coins and completed the so-called Lost World." And so, my friends, that is exactly what I did. I went back and scoured all the levels for missing Krem coins, and was honestly surprised that, while some of the secrets took a bit of searching, none of them felt unfairly hidden. Eventually, I was able to track them all down and nab the rest of the DK coins for good measure. After completing the last remaining Lost World level, the Crocodile Volcano's mouth opened where my final challenge awaited. The game ends in spectacular fashion, with K. Rool falling in the core of the island, causing it to completely self-destruct. This very last scene of the Kongs watching the island sink and K. Rool sail off into the sunset can really be described as nothing else but art. Never had I seen anything as colorful and vivid in a video game, and I couldn't help but just sit there for a while and think about what I accomplished. Maybe it's not quite as impressive today, but I couldn't help but feel genuinely rewarded just from these gorgeous visuals, and that is why the ending is also perfect. There is no way we can talk about this game without mentioning its soundtrack, which is easily one of the best ones written for a video game. Composed by David Wise, each track manages to capture both the visual and gameplay feel of each level, ranging from bouncy and silly to hauntingly beautiful. So if we take a level like Bramble Blast, for example, visually it looks absolutely terrifying, but when you add in the music of Sticker Brush Symphony, it suddenly takes on a calm beauty that helps you remain calm as you carefully make your way through it. It is of course an amazing track regardless of context, but its subtle role in helping the player persist through the challenge is really game music composition at its finest. The fact is that David Wise wrote an epic adventure movie score for a game with jumping monkeys, which is why it gets an 11 out of 10. To wrap things up, Donkey Kong Country 2 represents Rare at their absolute best. The game has stood the test of time and has remained a staple of the genre. While we continue to wait patiently for the next chapter of the Donkey Kong franchise, what Rare did with this IP remains something truly special. Every time that I boot this game up every year or so, I just can't help but be blown away every single time. If you haven't played this masterpiece yet, it is available on the Nintendo Switch online service. Until next time, this is Drew, signing off. See ya!